Hello, welcome back to Talent Thrives here. I've got my illustrious panel of recruiters back again today to talk about interview questions. Let's call it the good, the bad, the ugly of interview questions. What to ask, what not to ask when in front of a recruiter or in front of a hiring manager. If you've met them before, you know them, but let me do some quick intros. The whole panel has been recruiting for decades. I think if I add it all up, we've got more than 100 years of experience between the bunch of us. So, Lisa Oxenhandler from St. Louis, Missouri, recruiting in insurance and other disciplines. Mitchell Riley, focused recruitment in disaster recovery and construction out of Texas. Jaime Nunnalee, also from St. Louis area, focusing on sales and recruitment roles. Renee Dovich, recruiting and executive search out of the Boston area. Shane Fairchild, out of Columbus, Ohio, focus on accounting roles. And last but not least, our firm, the Fort Talent Group, we focus on entertainment, marketing, and other multiple industries. And the panel, as much as they may work out of their local regions, a lot of them work right across the United States, Canada, and some of them globally as well. So thank you all for being here today. Great to see everyone again.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks, Lance.
I'd like to focus on the candidate today. We, as business owners, we spend a ton of time working with our clients, new as well as legacy clients. But let's focus on the job seeker today. Over to the panel. Are there any questions in your career that jump out of the pack beyond the usual questions? So, are there any PhD level or Academy Award winning questions candidates can ask? Over to you guys. Anyone want to jump in on that?
I'll take a stab. So when candidates are interviewing with companies, right? I mean, it's also an opportunity for them to determine if it's going to be a match, for them as well. So it's important that they do their research on the company and all of that, which is a whole other ballgame. But questions that are good to ask could be, what are some of the critical success factors that you're looking for in this hire? How are you going to measure success for this role? Why is the position open and available? What do the first 3 months of the position look like? Stuff along those lines. Even if, I was hired and I had a fantastic first year, what did I accomplish? What are your top 3 priorities in rank and order of importance? And just tell me more about your culture. Culture is huge for a lot of people.
Great. Excellent, Renee. Thank you. Anyone else want to chime in on that question? Things to ask.
I can chime in. And, Renee mentioned researching the company. That's a no-brainer. So you don't want to ask them what they do. But a good question is, what is your unique differentiator in the market? Things about the team's goals and initiatives. What the manager's characteristics are most important in the successful employee. Things like that.
Yeah. Good. Anybody else? Right.
I always like asking what do you see this role as a success in a year?
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
Not
the other
just
one,
right this minute.
I sort of, my HR background kicks in. I always think of alignment, right? As a job seeker, am I going to be in alignment with the individual on the other side of the table or the company or the division? Because sometimes you might not be in alignment with where the whole company's going, but as long as you're in alignment with the unit manager, the division, his or her goals, I think that's critical. So I think any questions around that, and we've mentioned them already, but what's important to you as the hiring manager this year, and sort of localize it to that person, because then if this is the person you're working with for the next year or two, you're going to get that prime information out of them, because you want to help them, right? Yeah. If you do a good job and you make them look good, that's even better for them. So I think that's pretty critical. Shane, anything from the world of accounting that is jumps out that what do accountants ask? What do financial people ask, or directors of finance and people like that? Are there any critical questions that you can think of?
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you, like, tons of things, and we'll kind of talk through this as we go throughout the conversation today. But one question that I really like to ask, towards the end of the interview is, for me, like, I like to go down swinging, so I don't want to leave anything to chance. So, I'll ask, like, hey, is there anything we haven't covered today that you'd like to know about me, or do you have any hesitations or concerns regarding my candidacy? Because I want to address those while I'm here to help put your mind at ease.
Mm.
And it's okay if you don't have the answers and if you don't have a certain thing that they're looking for, how you respond can often determine, what their perception of you is and whether or not you'll be able to overcome whatever that hesitancy is. So for me, if it is something that, I don't have experience in, like obviously always be honest about it and acknowledge it. But I just say, hey, look, I can Google what the best of them, and what's helped me to be successful is leveraging the expertise of others around me. And if I don't know something, I will take the initiative to go find answers and come back to you. And, at the end of the day, you're trying to solve problems and not just add headaches, because you're trying to add value to the team and, take work off their plate. So anyways, hopefully that helps.
Yeah, no, absolutely.
It's just something that gives you a quick like pulse check as to like, hey, did I do okay? Or is there anything that we didn't cover? And it gives you a chance to address it while you're there.
Yeah. Yeah. Mitchell, anything to add at all or no? Or we've covered it all?
Yeah, I think they covered most of like the really great questions that a candidate can ask. A little twist in my thought here. I had a client that loves to ask this question. I want to get y'all's take on this is if you had one habit you want to change, whether it's in your personal or professional life, what would that be? And and I know he likes to ask it, and there's like, he's real into psychology. There's a little bit of psychology behind it, but he wants somebody to be able to identify their weaknesses and show that they're able to work on it. Obviously, when you don't want to open up too far on a personal level if there's real skeletons in a closet, but he stumps a lot of my candidates with it. And he also knows if I've prepped him. So he's been doing it for years. I think it's fascinating. Do you guys have, or Lance, have you ever had a hiring manager in your HR days? A really stumping question that you would ask a candidate?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. And I like that question your client's using. I have a couple of jokes. One was, we always said, never lead with my parole officer thinks, don't do that. And the other one, one of my early bosses in recruiting used to always, he had a standard list. And one of his was, if I talk to 4 or 5 people that know you really, really well, and they've worked with you, what am I going to hear? And then he said, listen for the answer, because if they say, well, I'm great at yada, 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 and he said they missed the question. The question was, what do other people think about you? And he said, this is my narcissist question. I'm trying to figure out if they're really self-centered or if they listened enough to dial down and go, well, my last boss always said yada, yada about me. And what he or she liked about me was, and he said, that's the reflection point for me. I'm trying to figure out if they're very self-aware in the interview. And so I just like that. I use it a lot. If I ask 4 or 5 people that know you really, really well and they've worked with you, what are they going to tell me about you? Boom. I thought that one was fairly good. And again, it's not so much, it's again, listening for where they're coming from with the answer. The other thing I found really funny, I've interviewed a million creative people in my life, and copywriters, the people that write ad copy, you would think a writer would have a million words at his or her disposal to answer any question. Generally, in an interview, they struggle the most because they have too many ways of answering the question. So they would sit there and go, and I don't know what they're doing, but they're off in their head scripting like, oh, I could answer it this way or that. And yet art directors, who quite often I would interview, would be right at it because they're visual thinkers. So the answers would come out very fast. Whereas a writer, it was almost like their Achilles heel. Oh, you've asked me something and I've got to really think about my answer here. So I found that interesting when interviewing creative teams, that sometimes visual thinkers answer differently.
Can I jump in, Lance? I agree with you. To prep people, I always tell candidates to be concise and direct on their answers. Because if you're talking for 5 minutes and you're not letting anybody get a word in, you almost are automatically eliminating yourself. So it's answer the question directly, be concise. And it's okay. I tell people it's okay to pause. Like if you're done talking and there's an awkward pause, let it sit. That's perfectly okay.
Yeah, I call it landing the plane. Land your plane.
Good. No, that's great.
And that's an excellent point.
Yeah. And I think a lot of the questions depend on the level of role, the position, right? Because a lot of the folks that I place are C-level, VP level people. So they're going to go in with a different line of questioning a lot of times than someone that's a more junior or a software engineer or anything like that.
Yeah.
Where they would ask, what are like the biggest issues the organization is facing right now, stuff like that.
Yeah. Yeah, very good question. Or dialing on that too, like what metrics are really critical to this specific role in this department right now? Because, they might be tracking 10 or 12 different metrics, but 2 are critical. And I find that sometimes, even when I've run recruiting teams, I hire a new recruiter and he or she is it time to fill, time to place, time to what, what do I get rewarded on here? And I found that always entertaining when I'm working with a recruiting team that I always say, like, why don't we find out what our boss wants to track and start there? Because that will be, really, really on top of, supporting the organization. Otherwise, we're chasing metrics that make great sense to us, but nobody else. So, yeah, no, I take your point, Renee, exactly that. Where's the organization steering right now? What are some of the critical issues in the next 6 to 12 months? Or are there any fires burning right now? However you phrase those questions, but where's the big mission going? What's happening to the ship right now? So I take your
Can
point.
I ask Mitchell a question?
Absolutely, Lisa,
Going back
please.
to your question, Mitchell, has there been one answer that has really struck the employer as, oh my gosh, that was the best answer?
Oh, the best. I don't remember the best.
Or the worst?
I know the worst. Yeah, that's what, as you were talking, I was like thinking, oh yeah, no, the worst. Yeah, I had a candidate like very openly say, well, I think I have a bit of a drinking problem and I've been considering getting into AA.
Oh my gosh.
And I was like, oof.
Transparency is nice, but wow.
Yeah,
And they weren't
honest to
joking.
a fault. Yeah, no, I mean,
Wow.
honest to a fault. They didn't hire him.
Yeah. Well, Lisa and Mitchell, you kind of opened the door. I mean, I said at the top of the chat, good, bad, the ugly. Are there other things that stand out to anybody on the panel as, like that one? That's a bell ringer. But are there other ones from your professional careers that you've said, oh, I wish they hadn't asked that, or do you have to prep a candidate to maybe, because, often I find they reveal to us in confidence all sorts of stuff. And is there anything you've had to edit out of, like, please don't ask that when you're in there for the interview?
I've had something, and it wasn't a candidate of mine. It was a client who I was starting, a new client I was recruiting for, and he shared a couple of things for interviews that he had had with previous candidates. One, it should go without saying, but be very cognizant of what is in the background of your Zoom interview. I guess the instance was, clearly the person must have been scrambling to find a spot last minute. He ended up in a bathroom and he had a drying rack behind him with ladies' garments. And he
Wow.
said there was like a panel style interview and they didn't end up moving forward with that person just because obviously attention to detail and stuff like that. And he also said he liked to take people out for a meal. And he
Right.
wanted to see how they, if they sat and ate like they're at a trough, that's how they'd be in front of clients, and that's not going to work. So it was part of the interview was just seeing their etiquette at the table and everything, which I found pretty interesting.
Yeah. Yeah. I to your point, Renee, I've done a number of those with senior people because the CEO said exactly that. I want to see table manners. I want to see who's representing our company and how they, and so dinner or lunch was standard on executive hires. There would be 2 or 3 cursory sort of phone interviews, and then we'd fly them in, and 2 or 3 people from the executive team, including myself, would go and have lunch or dinner with them. And it was also, I think, to break the bread and break the, the ice on the whole formality and see in a different setting what they're like, trying to hopefully get them to say other things that they might not have said earlier in an interview because it was more formal. So, even one of my old bosses used to always say, drink a bottle of wine before we get into anything. We were young at the time, but that was his thing. He thought they'll open up if they have a bottle of wine in them. So that was his sort of tactic. So we always had to be careful whenever he flew into town because we're like, he's going to start with alcohol. Get away from that, And in some corporate settings, that would be a huge no-no. But I'm going back about 30 years when life was different. Times were different.
I was going to say,
yeah, go ahead, please, Shane.
oh, sorry. Well, I was going to say, Renee, in line with the etiquette that you talked about, taking somebody out to lunch or something like that. The other thing too is just to remember to be polite and respectful, humble and kind to every single person you meet.
Mhm.
The administrative assistant, the janitor, everybody.
Yeah.
Because I'll tell you, like I've seen, I've heard of situations where the CEO and CFO have brought in, their administrative support and even a janitor that they talk to, like, hey, what was your perception of them? Because if they're rude, they're out. Like they're not going to have that. Everybody's going to be respected at the organization, and I appreciate that.
Yeah. Good
Yeah.
comment. Good comment. Yeah.
I mean, I can add in if here too. A lot of times I just tell people not to bring up too early HR topics. I mean, if they're working with a recruiter, you can ask them, but a lot of times people ask too early in the process, what's your benefits package? How many days off do I get? Or do you drug test? Don't ask in a first
Ooh.
interview if they drug
Wow.
test.
Nailed it.
Those are some red flags right there. And it's ruled people out pretty quickly because they're focusing on the wrong things. You need to initially focus if you're a fit for the job, if the job's a fit for you, and work those things out on the back end.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's Jamie. Like that's to your point. I tell people to avoid the with them, like what's in it for me questions. First, make sure there's alignment. It's a role that you actually want to pursue. You can negotiate and do all that stuff on the back end. It's
Yeah.
too early for that. You don't have an offer in hand. Like
Right.
you're putting the cart in front of the horse. So
Yeah.
Or
Yeah.
there's just a delicate way to approach it. I mean, because if landing your next job is with a company where there is definitely going to be room for growth and career advancement, I get it. You don't want to put the cart before the horse, but it's important to know if this organization has room for growth. Because if they don't, then
Yeah.
it's not going to be in alignment with what you want anyway. It's better to find out earlier. But I agree with the benefits questions and all that, not to get hard on that early on.
Yeah. And don't you find too, I have often coached people, have a list of questions. When we used to do a lot more face to face, I'd say bring it in, whether it's on a piece of paper, on your phone, I don't care, but have 10 or 12 good questions ready. And then, back in the day when we used pens, I would just say scratch them off as they go, because they'll see that you're actually like, got it, got it, got it. And they'll know you've probably got something else to ask, right? So, and I often coach candidates, wait till the end. And normally in most formats that I've worked in, we would say back to the candidate, look, we've asked all our questions. Do you have any of us? And I said, there it is. There's the opening right there. Jump on it. Well, I had 10 or 12, but you've answered most of them. But I've got these two that haven't been covered. I'm really curious about. To me, it feels interactive. It feels like the person came in ready and prepared, and they've appreciated what you're saying because they've actually crossed off the ones that are relevant, and that you know what I mean. And rather than, because I've seen in some interviews, someone goes, "No, I have no questions." I'm like, "Oh, come on, this was your chance." Be prepared, have something ready. Does that resonate with everyone, or is there
Yes,
something different?
I always tell people to write your questions down, bring a padfolio, bring a copy of your resume. I'm like, I know they're going to have a copy of your resume, but you have it too. You want to make sure you have it if for some reason they failed to print it out. I think that prep work goes a long way. I have clients that will say, what do you know about our company? Why do you want to work here? And if they
Yeah.
can't say what you do or why they want to work for your organization, that's a huge red flag too. Be prepared. Companies love that. They want to see that you're interested in them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Demonstrate your level of interest. And that just goes back to doing your homework.
Right.
Do your research. Who are you going to meet with? How many companies do they have under their belt? Do you have anything in common? Look at the financials, depending on the role that you're interviewing for, but knowing as much about the company, their numbers, any of that stuff goes a long ways. And yeah, if you don't have one question, that's
and knowing their competitors sometimes.
If they answered everything, tell them they answered it and figure out one more to ask. That's something, because it shows interest. And it also goes to closing like a professional as well. A lot of people don't ask for the job or show their interest. Some people kind of stay meek and quiet, but it's, if you're enthusiastic about the role, let it shine through. I mean, not to the point that you're going to be scary, so to speak, but yeah, let it shine through so that they know, and tell them that you're interested, and ask what the next steps are, and follow up with the thank you email. I know a lot of people think that's outdated, but there's a lot of people that don't get moved along because, especially for sales roles, if you can't follow up after an interview, then you're not going to get probably a next interview for a sales role.
I actually suggest a handwritten note.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
just to
It-
set themselves apart. Yes.
Right.
And it will take a while to get there, but it does set them apart.
Lisa,
It's
to add on
memorable.
to that, I've told, sorry, Shane.
Oh, it's all right. I was just saying
I've
it's
told,
memorable.
go ahead.
I was just saying it's memorable when you send the handwritten note when they get it in the mail, because it does make you stand out.
Right.
To your point, Lisa.
What were you going to say, Jamie?
Oh, I've had, when I do sales roles, so it's a little bit different. I've had people that if they're in a final in-person interview, I'm like, bring the note card with you, write it out in the lobby and leave it with them there.
Oh.
Like write it out and leave it on your way out the door. And it's a differentiator.
Without a doubt. Yeah. And that's how I suggest most of the time. But
Mhm.
since a lot of them are, online or video kinds of interviews,
Mhm.
kind of difficult. Yeah.
Yeah.
But if they're
Yeah.
local, absolutely.
Or also, if you can't find an email address or their mailing address after an initial phone interview, I tell people it's okay to reach out and send a thank you note on LinkedIn. And like it shows that you're taking initiative and that you're tracking them down. You can't find that information, like they want to know what you're doing to go track and do it a different way.
Right.
Yeah.
And to Renee's point there too about next steps, because sometimes the interviewer will say, well, to the candidate at the end of the interview, here's what we're going to do, or set the expectation. In the next week or two, we'll get back to you with yada 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 yada. But I've often coached candidates, if they don't, before you leave, you can say, hey, I'm really curious about the job, and can you set an idea of what I should expect in the next couple of weeks? Like, would I hear from you by next Friday? Or just throw that out there. If the interviewer hadn't already set the time frame, ask. And I think it's almost like a sales close. It's like, I'm leaving, but I don't want to be out there in limbo wondering, so does that make sense, just to actually sort of drill in? What should I expect? When would I hear back from you?
Yeah,
That sort of
no.
thing. I remember a million years ago saying, I imagine you've interviewed 10 or 20 people for this role. Am I in your top 3? That was my question. Just to watch their eyeballs. Like, I think it was a little too direct for some people, but I was really curious, and I thought, look, I really want the job. I'm just curious. Am I on the short list?
On the other side of the coin, Lance, do you feel that a candidate should say, hey, I've been interviewing, I've had a couple of interviews, but this really sounds wonderful and this is my number one choice. What's the process, or what are the next steps? How do you feel
Yeah.
about that?
Yeah, I like it. What does the panel think? Because I appreciate that question, Lisa. That's exactly it. You're drilling in and making it's a call to action, really. You're making that
Right.
panel or that hiring manager come up with some information that he or she maybe have been coaching privately in their head or on a piece of paper for a minute, but now you've actually get them to, bring it to the forefront. So I'm curious though, not about me. What's the panel think? That kind of question.
Man, here's some things I would say. In a lot of ways, this is kind of like dating, right? Like you want to show some interest, but not desperation. Because
Right.
if you come in too hot and heavy and strong, you're going to lose your leverage.
Yeah.
So there's got to be like a little hint of mystery without playing games. Like I don't like to play games. I like to be a straight shooter. I will show my interest, but I don't want to be over the top. And I kind of want to play it cool and let them come to me versus me chasing them down, because then it pushes them away. Like that's just been my experience.
No, that's why I was saying without being over the top earlier.
just
You
don't
want to
over the
show
top.
your enthusiasm without coming off desperate to a degree. But I think that's a great question. And just letting them know that, you're actively interviewing and you feel that this role is in strong alignment with your background and level of interest. And right now, it's your top choice. You would love to further the conversation. What are the next steps? How
And it
quickly
puts
are you looking to make a
urgency.
decision?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. And how about prepping? I just want to share a quick anecdote. I remember a million years ago interviewing a top creative team for an ad agency, and we got a brief from the client. They gave us a short list. They said, here are the 10 people we've already vetted for this job, like just on reputation. But we want you guys to do individual interviews with each of them. And because we think we have the winner, we think we know who's the top of this pack, but we want your professional input on this. And I thought, oh, this is a little different search, because it was literally more like we're one of the gatekeepers or one of the filters on their selection process. We were flattered that they picked us to be that partner. But it was interesting because as we started to interview folks, we were like, oh, they were pretty good. Oh, and there were pairs like art director and copywriter, but like vice president level. And I distinctly remember when we got our winners, because they walked in the room, we asked them to sort of give an intro, a little bio of each one of them, and then they flipped it right back on us. And I thought, oh, this is a funny one. I've never had that before. They're like, why don't you tell me how you got into the business? I'm like, what? And then they asked my boss, well, how did you get in the business? And so it was really interesting to actually be interviewed. I thought this was a very different approach, but no one else did it. And so they were kind of doing this bounce back qualification thing. And they provided some humor along the way. It was quite funny. They called my boss Darth Vader, and I was his young Padawan. And that was all. We had some good laughs over that. But what I distinctly remember when we started asking questions about the job, they already knew what they were interviewing for because they knew the small environment in the industry. They came in with PhD level kind of information. Did you know the client, your client's client, does the following? And they had researched the vendors around the business and what the street was saying and what the reputations were of various places. Like they came in with information that no one else in the pack of 10 even came close to. And we were like, clearly these guys have done way more research. And we called the client and we were like, this is the winning team. And they were like, yeah, that's what we thought too. So it's kind of fun to see that they were just the smartest people in the room. They were really, really on top of things. And we were blown away. And I'm still, it's a long time ago, but I remember it like yesterday. They were smart, funny, entertaining, but also highly studied. And it was a no-brainer that they should have the job over all these other folks. And it was a high-profile role at a big ad agency, at a big account, a big piece of business. So, but I digress. I go on. Any other thoughts from the panel? Good, bad, or ugly things to not do? I think we've covered good ground. But I'm curious if there's anyone else that had something pop up in your head while we were talking. Nope, all good. All right. I would like to thank you all again. If anyone needs to find any of you, you're all on LinkedIn, and you've got your own websites. And I'll post that up on the YouTube when I publish this as well as some contact information. Thank you all again. Have a great day, and I will see you very soon.
Thanks for
Lance.
hosting.
Thanks,
You're
Lance.
very welcome. Thanks, everybody. Take care. Bye-bye.